Dynamics SL. To start on our agenda today, we're going to be taking a look at applying year-end updates. We'll then move into year-end processing tips in the payroll module, project controller, and also accounts payable. First up is the year-end updates. So I know everyone's anxiously awaiting the updates that Microsoft will be releasing. Those hopefully should be coming soon. This year, Microsoft is providing updates for the Dynamics SL 2018 versions, only 2018. Now, as far as applying those year-end updates, again, we don't have them yet, so I don't have specific directions to walk through on installing those for you or what they exactly contain. I've got last noted contents that I will definitely share with you, but generally speaking, the process is the same, similar steps for installing those. So I'm just going to run through that so you have some familiarity with it. First thing, to download the updates, you will want to go to docs.microsoft.com. And once there, you can search on Dynamics SL year-end updates. And you'll probably see prior years. If you wanted to search 2021 year-end updates, you could do that too. Either way, you're going to see the updates once they're available to download. You will go ahead and install those using the instructions that are included with the download. In prior years, there have been some different instructions depending on the exact version you're on. Typically, that was with, if you had 2015 versus 2018. I don't know if they'll be different this year depending on your build number for 2018. So if you're CU1 versus CU4 or 5, that sort of thing. But just make note if there may be instructions that differ slightly depending on your SL version. Also, Microsoft in the past has included some YouTube video on walking through the installation of those. Again, I don't know if they plan on doing that this year, but if you're looking for a little extra guidance and you're installing them, you could always go out there and search too to see if one's available. By all means, your partner would be able to assist you as well. You do want to make sure that you have all users exit Dynamics SL before you apply the update. And then you want to back up your SL system and application databases, as well as any custom reports that you may have within your SL installation. Now, as far as the exact installation steps, as I mentioned, I don't have those right yet since they have not been released, but typically you're going to want to make sure you install that at the server directly versus at a workstation. You're going to locate a directory for your version if they do differ within the download itself, and run an installation executable to copy in any new screens and or reports into your necessary SL directory structure. So that's typically your accounts payable, payroll, and general ledger folder structure out there. In the past, there has sometimes been a SQL script that you might have to run against your database in SQL Server Management Studio. So you may need to get access to SQL Server as well to apply those updates. Now, you might be wondering what all updates are included in these year-end updates that we speak of. They can include any current year reports, any year-end resolutions, so any changes that may need to be done to make sure your processing and reports are correct, as well as any electronic file changes or any changes to the AP 1099s and any changes to your W-2 formats. Now, for this year specifically, last I heard, the 2021 year-end updates from Microsoft were going to include changes surrounding the 1099 NEC form. Previously, it was printing 2 to a form. That's been changed to print 3 to a form. There were some alignment changes on the 1099 miscellaneous form, as well as some updates and changes to the electronic filing for 1099s. So that's all that I know of. I don't believe there were any changes to the W-2s this year. Now, it's recommended that those year-end updates be applied after you have closed the payroll module for the year. There is the year-end update that we speak of, and then there's also a separate tax table update that gets released by Microsoft. Now, the tax table updates for the new 2020 year should be applied after the payroll module has been closed for your current 2021 year. Those year-end updates include the information that we previously discussed, while the tax table update provides changes to those tax tables that are used by your SL payroll deductions. Please note that there can be a few different releases of the tax table updates over the course of the year as those tax tables change. So just be sure if you're downloading those that you're capturing the most current tax table update that's available for download up there. The year-end updates are typically released in mid-December timeframe. The tax table updates are typically released a little bit later, maybe late December, early January timeframe. Could be the same. They just want to make sure that they're capturing all the changes they can before they release that. There are a few items to take into consideration as you're working on your year-end processing in SL. You are required to do calendar year processing in payroll and accounts payable, even if you are on a fiscal year setup. Now you can post entries to prior periods, you can post to prior periods as needed even if they're closed periods, but the thing that you want to make note of is that your setup must allow for such postings to closed periods and years. So there's setup options within the general ledger module, it's in the GL setup screen, that can restrict the user's ability to post back to closed periods and years. And then there could also be third-party add-ons installed on top of Dynamics SL that would also impact your ability to post back to those closed periods and years. So if you do have adjustments that may need to be made to prior periods or closed years, just double check that your setup allows for that before you go ahead and close the year, so you're not then stuck, not being able to post back as needed. Also, something to note is the W-2 and 1099 amounts are updated based on your check date. So that's what drives, which year is getting updated. It's all based on that check date. Now, you may have noticed that the year-end updates provided by Microsoft are available for the SL 2018 versions. So if you happen to still be running on an SL 2011 or 2015 version, Plumline Consulting is offering a year-end package for the SL 2011 FP1, SP2, and SP3 versions, and also the SL 2015 CU1 and CU2 versions as an annual subscription purchase. So this package is going to contain all of the same year-end updates that are released by Microsoft for the SL 2018 version. It's just recreated and packaged for these 2011 and 2015 versions. If you'd like some more information on these, you're interested in purchasing these, you may reach out to us at vborak@plumlineconsulting.com. That'll get you in touch with Valerie. And again, I just have the versions noted there that this Plumline solution will be offered for. Moving on to the payroll module. So the typical flow for your year-end processing in the payroll module is going to include closing the year for payroll in the GL closing screen. You want to reconcile your 941 and unemployment reports. You're going to print the W-2s to plain paper and review the calculated amounts there. Also edit the W-2 data as needed in employee W-2 history in initialized mode, and printing the W-2s. Also generating the electronic file. So we'll dive into these and look at them in a little bit more detail. First, you'll want to confirm that all the data for 2021 has been entered and processed. You can review the payroll batch register report to make sure all batches have been released and posted. Reconcile your payroll accounts in payroll with the general ledger account balances. And to do that, you can use your account distribution and GL trial balance reports to assist with that process. You want to print any period end reports, such as your 941 quarterly tax worksheet. There's the unemployment tax worksheet and also the earnings and deduction report. So then at that point, you're ready to do the year-end closing and payroll. So looking at the closing process, this is going to be done in the closing screen within your general ledger module. The December period of your fiscal year is always going to be closed with the closing type of year, not period. The closing then is going to cycle payroll to the new calendar year for you. It'll also create deductions for the new year and history records for that prior year. So this allows you to calculate checks for that new calendar year then. If you do not do this and you try to calculate checks for the new year, you're going to get messages that's going to state that the deductions do not exist yet for that new year. So it's not going to see those yet until you run that closing. You want to make sure that you clear all calculations in payroll before closing the year, because this can cause errors in the new year too if they are left out there. An important note that I want to reiterate is just to make sure that you close payroll before you run calculations in the new year. Now here's a screenshot of the closing screen itself. The year option on the payroll module is selected, and then you would click the Begin Processing button. Now if you attempt to make an invalid selection, so maybe you select year as the closing type when it's not your December period, or if maybe you tried selecting period as the closing type when it is your December period. So it was December period, but you chose period instead of year. The system will pop up a warning message, and it'll be sure to let you know, and it'll indicate that it's an improper closing type selection, and it will not allow you to proceed without making the proper selection. So whichever period is December for you, that's when you're going to do the closing type of year in the payroll module. Here we have a high-level overview now of the W-2 steps for year-end processing. We're going to want to go into each of these modules here in a little bit more detail next. But first up, the year-end updates are applied, and then the W-2s get calculated. Next, you want to review the data on the W-2 forms just to make sure that the information contained on them is accurate. And then you can make any edits and corrections as needed. From there, the W-2 forms would get printed. And last, you would be the creation of the electronic file if you're going to file electronically. Once the year-end updates have been applied, you're then ready to move forward with doing your W-2 calculations. So we would open the W-2 calculation screen in the payroll module. You're going to choose your current W-2 year. So on the screenshot here, that's your calendar year. In this case, it's set to 2018. I'm a little outdated. Obviously, you would choose 2021 there. You also fill in your Social Security wage limit. You're going to select over here in the top right corner your pay groups that you wish to calculate the W-2s for. And at that point, you'd click Begin Processing then. In the grid section of the screen, it's going to show you the employees that belong to the chosen pay groups. You would select your selections for those that you wish to calculate and click Begin Processing. Now, one thing I want to note in here, if for some reason you have made edits to any employee's W-2 amounts in initialize mode within the employee W-2 history screen, and you do not wish for those edits to be overridden by running a new W-2 calculation, you want to make sure that you select this checkbox here to protect edited W-2 information. And then also, if the employee has edits, you would check the box here as well to indicate that they have edits made. So that's going to protect them from being overridden with running the W-2 calculation. Let's take a deeper look now at, let's see here. This one, this is the employee W-2 history. So we can review the calculations here. We have a couple options on reviewing that data. You can print the forms to file, and you can open that up in Word. You can also print it to plain paper if you wanted, so you didn't use up forms. There is the plain paper copy, which will print the boxes for you as well if you're printing that one. Now here I have up the employee W-2 history screen, and in here you can review the data that was calculated on an individual employee basis. So you would bring up that employee and the year that you wish to review the numbers for. So this is very useful in troubleshooting and looking back at what calculations were made by the processing. So if you do determine that there's corrections that need to be made to the W-2s, we will first want to try to determine what is causing it to be incorrect. There's several potential causes for that sort of thing. If the federal wages are what appear to be incorrect, I'd suggest taking a look at your earnings type, see if maybe something was incorrectly set up there. Also look at exemptions that should exist and make sure that there's nothing that's missing there. Now, if any items are found, you would want to correct the setup of them and then go back and rerun the W-2 calculation process and review the amounts again. Now, if your state wages are what appear to be incorrect, again, we're also going to look at the earnings types, make sure those are set up correctly, look for any missing exemptions that maybe should exist. But in this case, if any such items are found to exist, we have a couple options for resolving. One would be to use initialize mode to correct the year-to-date subject wages in the employee history. and you would correct those and then rerun the W-2 calculation process. The alternative is to use initialize mode to correct the state wages in employee W-2 history and do not recalculate the W-2s. Again, with either of these options, if you're using initialize mode, strongly recommended to make sure you've got current backups of the database, and just be very cautious working in initialize mode. Moving on, if a tax amount is found to be incorrect, we can take a look and see if the issue is with federal, state, or local taxes. And make sure that your federal deductions are all properly coded with a type of federal in the deduction maintenance screen. Also for state deductions in the deduction maintenance screen, they should be coded as a type of state. And the appropriate two-letter code or two-letter state code should be included on those as well if they're a type of state. And then lastly, just make sure that your local taxes are coded as type equal local, and that they have the appropriate two-letter state code entered on them as well in deduction maintenance. For any tax amounts that were not taken properly, you could initialize those tax amounts to be correct. Couple notes, it is key to correct the setup issues to avoid problems the following year. As I mentioned in the closing process, it's going to roll deductions forward to create those for the new year. If we fix those before you close, any setup issues, if you fix that before you close the year, obviously that setup will carry forward on the deduction created for the new year. If you've already closed the year and you find something wrong with the setup, you would want to make sure you're changing it for the new year, obviously, for that to take effect. So just be very careful using initialize mode to modify employee history. You may, if you're not comfortable with it, contact your partner or support just to determine the best approach in resolving things if you're questioning it. Here I've got some items to make note of with your W-2 calculations. So the W-2 calculation process, you can run that at any time. You can do it before or after your year-end close has been completed, as long as the history is being retained for the year that you wish to calculate for. It is recommended to go ahead and calculate the W-2s before the year is over, just so you can test those numbers out and allow you to get a feel for how things are shaping up to be. The W-2s can be recalculated after the last check of the year has been run then. If you have any inactive employees who have earnings or deductions for the W-2 year, they can be calculated and printed as well. If an earnings type or deduction amount needs to be printed in a specific box number on the W-2s, you can use the W-2 control tab of the earnings type maintenance screen or deduction maintenance screen to indicate that box number and or letter of the box. So remember, if the calendar year has been closed, it's going to be necessary to use the deduction history screen versus deduction maintenance screen to access and modify that record for the prior year for it to impact that year's W-2. And then also you would want to do it in deduction maintenance to impact the next year. If the employee W-2 history screen is used to modify any W-2 information using initialize mode, and the W-2 calculation process is reran after that, all the previous changes will be overridden. So that's where I mentioned if you want that to stay intact, just be sure to check that protect edited W-2 information option before running the calculation process. If you happen to be missing a state employer ID, you can go into the deduction maintenance screen on the W-2 control tab. You can put that in there. And if you're missing the federal employer ID, you would go to the company maintenance screen to plug that in. The W-2 forms report within the payroll module is what's used to print the W-2s. Dynamics SL does not have the copy 1 and 2 report formats, but you can use the copy D instead. SL does use a standard 2-part form. It also offers a 4-part or 4-up format as well. You can obtain pre-printed forms from a company called Deluxe. They've been providing these forms for many years, and they've been found to line up quite nicely with the SL W-2 format. You can also print your own forms using the copy A, B, C, and D formats. These are all referred to as the plain paper copies, and those are going to print with the boxes as well as with your numbers. Copy A is that federal copy, and that must be in the scannable red ink. Copies B, C, and D, those are not required to be in the red ink though. Now, as far as creating the electronic file, you can use the Generate W-2 electronic file screen to create the file that you would then provide to the IRS with your W-2 information. You would populate required fields on the screen. It just requires the calendar year, the path to the file that's going to be created. You can change that path. Just make sure you note where it's going to be created so you can reference that later because you're going to need that. You also plug in a transmitter PIN number that's provided by Social Security Administration and contact information for someone at your organization. The company identification fields default in from the company maintenance screen in SL. These can be overridden if needed, but ultimately they pull from the company maintenance screen. Now, once you hit begin processing on that window, it's going to create a file called IRS Tax.001. This is the file which would be provided to the IRS. If needed, you can open that file in Notepad if you needed to look at it, formatting purposes, anything like that. From there, you'd follow instructions provided by Social Security Administration for transmitting that file then. The file format produced by Dynamics SL is usable by a program called AccuWage, and it's a free software provided by the SSA to check the electronic file for formatting accuracy. So it just identifies common format errors in the wage submissions and greatly reduces rejections for that type of thing. So you can always run it through there if you'd like. Moving on to Project Controller. The steps for year-end processing in Project Controller include making sure that all of the data has been entered for the current period and that all other modules have been closed for the current period in the GL closing screen. As we know, mistakes can happen when you're doing your allocations, your billing, approving time, that sort of stuff. So take, for example, time cards that have not been approved. Those will post to the new period, regardless of what period they have in week maintenance. So in order to help with these sorts of things, it's recommended that you make sure the following items have been reviewed and processed as needed before running a closing in Project Controller. You want to review the time cards. You would complete the following processes for labor commitment load, GL labor posting, and pay labor interface. Continuing on, you would want to review your expense reports, run the FTT process, complete the revenue recognition and allocation processor, execute your billing transaction load, complete the invoicing, and then you can close the period. As far as the closing, the project module must be closed at the end of each fiscal period. The closing can be ran for the fiscal period or year. Now this closing is a little bit different. It's done in the close period screen within the Project Controller module. This is not done in the GL closing screen as done with the other modules in Dynamics SL. This screen specifically is going to perform a set of control tests. It's going to check to make sure that all submodules have posted to project. It checks to make sure the accounting modules are closed to any additional entries, that all your project charge batches are posted, and if any exceptions are identified, then the closing is going to be blocked. Time cards are also reviewed, and a warning message will appear containing the number of unposted items being carried forward. Sometimes the closing screen will present warnings versus errors. If it's just a warning, these items are not going to prevent you from closing the period or year. However, errors will definitely prevent you from proceeding with the close. Moving on. If this close period screen detects that the current period is also the last period in the fiscal year, the title of the Begin Processing button will change over to Begin Year-End Close, and it will actually close the year for us. If a year-end close takes place, all your balance forward amounts are calculated for those projects that have their balance forward switch on, and summary records are written then for the new year. So here I want to show you the closed period screen itself. As you can notice at the top of this window, the current period is 11, the next period is 12. So we haven't yet hit the end of the fiscal year for this yet. So the button at the bottom of this window just says begin processing. It's only going to close the period in this case. Now this window, on the other hand, has the current period as 12 and the next period as 1. So here it detects that this is the end of our fiscal year. The button at the bottom now says begin year-end close. So it recognizes that it's going to make the appropriate closing, whether it's a period or a year for you. Prior to processing the closing, it's important to review the project maintenance records for open projects. Any of your open projects that have their balances carried forward should have the balance forward at year-end option selected. So that balance forward at year-end just determines whether the year-end total of a project's budget and actuals are rolled forward as the beginning balance for the coming year during that year-end closing process. If you have projects that span multiple fiscal years, they should have that checked so that the ending balance is rolled forward to the next year. For annual projects or those that are budgeted each year without regard to previous years, that checkbox should be clear, so the beginning balance is set to 0 then for the next year. If your year is closed and some projects were not marked as balance forward, and they should have been, the balances can be corrected by changing the current period and project controller setup back to the last period of the previous year. You would then mark the balance forward option in project maintenance, and then you can go back and rerun the closing process again for the project controller module. So it is much less forgiving than some of the other modules that we close in SL and the GL closing screen. So this one you can actually set it back, fix your setup, and rerun that closing process, and it will carry those forward for you. In the project controller module, you also want to review the fiscal period maintenance to set up the fiscal periods for your new year. Make sure you have those defined. And in the time and expense module, review your week maintenance to set up the week ending dates for your new year. That wraps up the project controller topic. So now we will move forward to accounts payable and 1099 processing. Here we have an overview of the steps for the year-end processing and accounts payable. Just to run down this list, we want to review our open AP files. You would print your AP batch register report, just review statuses of looking for batches that may need to be processed through yet before you run your closing. Make sure you post any transactions from AP in the GL post transaction screen. You can also print your vendor period trial balance and the period sensitive aged AP reports. You can tie those to your GL trial balance report out of the general ledger module. If you happen to have recurring entries that you use in AP, make sure those have been generated, released, and posted to general ledger as well. A couple other reports you can use are the check register report and the aged AP report. You would then close the year in the GL closing screen and then close the 1099 calendar year if needed to roll the two open 1099 years forward 1 year. And that depends on what 2 years you have open, whether or not you need to do that or not. For 1099 processing, there's the 1099 calendar year control screen. This is what's used to maintain the two open 1099 years that SL will allow you to have at any given time. Now your 1099 amounts can be manually updated using initialize mode. In your AP vendor maintenance screen, there's a 1099 info tab. And if you find any of those to be incorrect, you can go into initialize mode, go right into that screen and manually update those to be correct. The 1099 amounts are all calculated based on your check date paying the 1099 coded vouchers. So as your vouchers are entered, if that's 1099, you would put in the 1099 box number on the voucher. That does not record anything as a 1099 amount at that point. It's when that voucher gets paid. The check date on the check paying it is then what gets recorded under a 1099 amount. The AP integrity check screen, there is an option in there to rebuild 1099 amounts. This only works when the vendors were properly coded as 1099 vendors and the vouchers were properly coded with 1099 box numbers. So such setup changes here are not retroactive. The 1099 preview report. So one thing to note with the preview report is that it's going to show all vendors marked as 1099 vendors, regardless of the amounts paid to them. So you're going to see anyone and everyone that's flagged as a 1099 vendor. The 1099 forms report, on the other hand, though, is only going to print for those vendors that have hit the limit and require a form to be printed for them. So make note of the differences between those two. Your 1099 amounts are going to be updated throughout the year. So as you have vouchers that are coded with the 1099 box number and those get paid, those are going to update your 1099 amounts. Again, the vendors must be flagged as a 1099 vendor. The voucher must have a 1099 box number on it. The voucher has been paid, and then that check date determines the 1099 year to update. There's no extra processes required to print. There's no calculation process to run, anything like that. You would only need to run a process if you're generating the electronic file to send to the IRS. In AP, you would go under Reports and access the 1099 Forms report. You can preview this using the 1099 Preview report, or you can also print the actual 1099 forms if you'd like. You can print those as many times as needed. It's not a one and done process. Just note, as I mentioned before, the preview is going to show all vendors, whether they hit the limit and are required to get a form or not. The forms report is only going to show for those vendors that have hit the limit. And new for this year with year-end updates, the 1099 forms report used to be 2 forms per page. Now it's going to be 3. In regards to your 1099 years, SL allows you to have 2 open 1099 years at any given time. Typically, your prior year is left open, and then you have the current year open as well. So for example, as we are still in December of 2021, we might have 2021 as one open year and also 2022 as our next open year. We could also have a scenario, since we're still in 2021, we could have 2020 as one open year and 2021 as an open year. In order to process checks out of accounts payable, your check date has to fall in an open 1099 year. So if you currently, I shouldn't say that, if you are in January of 2022 needing to process a 2022 dated check, you will need to make sure that 2022 is one of your open 1099 years. Okay. As far as printing the 1099 forms, I mentioned the 2 open 1099 years. The oldest open 1099 year is going to be what's called your current 1099 year, and the most current 1099 year is going to be called the next. So we have current year and next year. The oldest one is current, the most latest one is the next. So depending on what year you have open that you need to print forms for, you may need to come to the Options tab and click the next 1099 year. So just to reiterate, if I currently have 2020 and 2021 as my 2 open 1099 years and I need to print forms for 2021, I would need to check this box. On the flip side, if I had 2021 and 2022 as my 2 open 1099 years, I would not need to check this box to get forms for 2021. For, let's see here, calendar year control. So processing here, this is the screen that's used to purge the oldest 1099 year and roll them forward 1 year. You must do this, as I said, to be able to print checks for a given year. Just be careful in here that you only click the begin processing button 1 time. You don't want to accidentally purge it too many times. If that should happen, reach out to your partner support. We can help you through that. But in here, in this scenario, my screenshot has the current year as 2017, next year is 2018. To roll those forward a year to make 2018 and 2019 my 2 open years, I would use the process option to purge oldest year and click begin processing, and it will roll them forward. Now, if it's determined that the 1099 information is not accurate, maybe you had a voucher that wasn't coded with the 1099 box number, maybe you had a vendor that wasn't flagged as a 1099 vendor. Any changes to that sort of stuff will impact the system going forward, but it's not retroactive. So in those instances, we are able to come in here and edit the amounts on a vendor by vendor basis using the vendor maintenance screen. You do have to be in initialize mode. So your SL user will need initialize mode access to this particular screen in order to do this. So as you see, we're on the 1099 info tab. And the bottom portion of the screen, we have 2 columns, one for each of your open 1099 years. You would find the year that you need to edit. And when you're in initialize mode, these boxes all become enabled so that you can edit them. Typically, when you're not in initialize mode, they are disabled, so they're view only. The Generate 1099 electronic file screen is used to create the file that contains the 1099 amounts to be submitted electronically to the IRS. You can generate for either of your 2 open 1099 years. Just a heads up, some of the fields required on that screen are the vendor PIN number and contact information, so that if there are any questions on the file submitted, they can have someone to reach out to. There's a control code. That's going to come from the IRS, but most of the information here populates from the company maintenance screen in SL, and it can be changed if needed before generating the file. So just double check that information, make sure it's accurate before you process. You would select the year, so we have our 2 open calendar years, the file location down here at the bottom where the file will be created. Make note of where that is because you'll need that later. You can select which vendors to include up in the top right corner. Transmitter tab here across the top is used to populate some required data over there. And that's this information. So that has that control code, some of that information, contact information. Now, some common 1099 processing issues. So you could potentially see a system message 532. That could be received when you're trying to print AP checks if your check date year is not yet an open 1099 year. If that's the case, go ahead and use your 1099 calendar year control screen to purge the oldest year and roll those forward. If your 1099 balances are incorrect for a vendor, you can use initialize mode to correct them in the vendor maintenance screen as we discussed. You can do a manual correction or potentially use integrity check to rebuild the 1099 history if needed. That's going to do all vendors though. And again, it depends on the setup and the type of scenario. Integrity check may or may not resolve the issue you're experiencing. The current 1099 year, if that happens to get purged too many times by mistake, again, contact your partner support for assistance with that. There's some SQL updates we can utilize to reset the years and rebuild the 1099 amounts for those years. With that, we will open it up for questions. If you have anything, you can type that in the questions pane. Also, if you think of anything after our session has ended, feel free to send those to info@plumlineconsulting.com, and we can always follow up with you after the fact as well.
Melanie, we have 2 questions right now. These were from earlier in the session. Can you repeat what changes are taking place to the 1099 form in the year-end update?
Excellent. Yes. So what I know of at the moment is that the 1099 NEC form is being changed. So previously it was printing 2 to a page. It's now going to be printing 3 to a page. And then there were some changes to the alignment on the 1099 miscellaneous form. I don't know if that was just box numbers were moved around or something along those lines, but something with the alignment on the 1099 miscellaneous form. And then there were also some changes and updates to the electronic file.
So the other question is, when it comes to the formatting to the 1099s and the NEC forms, is there a good way to handle alignment issues for different printers?
It's a case-by-case basis, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yes.
And then It's somebody said that they missed the beginning of the presentation. We will be sending out a copy of the slide deck as well as the recording, and we will post it on probably a few different websites for you all. So if you missed it or you are hoping to get a copy to share with anybody within your company, then we will have that for you probably early next week. Any other questions that have not been answered? I saw that Plumline's updates will be available Monday. Have you heard when Microsoft's will be released for 2018? Well, they gave me mine first, so I'm hoping that Microsoft's release will be out by the end of next week. The original release date was December 17th, and they are trending to definitely have it out by then, hopefully a little sooner. Other questions? We'll just give it a minute or two in case anything else pops up. For anybody that needed originally, Melanie mentioned the year-end updates for 2011 and 2015 are available. Please keep in mind that the tax table updates are not included in your year-end update, and the 2018 tax tables can still be downloaded and applied to your 2011 and 2015 systems. So keep that in mind. If you need to apply your tax table updates, you can still download them and apply them even on the older versions. And with that, Melanie, thank you so much for the presentation today. We will provide this to the SL community again, hopefully next week. You all have a safe and happy holiday season, and we look forward to working with you in 2022. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for attending.